before we start, I just want to show you some of the materials that we will need. I have collected yogurt pots and we're going to use these as the moulds to drape the clay over. So any size works. It's good to have a selection so you can try out a few different size pots. Now what I did was I coated the plastic with a layer of Vaseline or petroleum jelly, and then I used cling film on top of this. This makes it easy to remove the clay from the mould later. As a template to cut around the clay, then I've just used a tile, but this can be any shape that you like. You can even make them out of paper or draw straight onto the clay. Then to cut the clay, I've just got my craft knife. I'm going to smooth the clay, which is very important for consistency of clay. I'm using the rubber kidney. I have handy some tools in case I might need them. These are just modelling tools which will help me to shape it. We're going to also use our wire cutters to cut the clay. And I have a few bits and pieces that I might use for putting in texture. So these are special wooden rolling pins which will have texture in them, but you could also use bits of fabric. Particularly this lacy fabric works very, very well, but flowers, grass, leaves, anything at all can work to imprint into the clay. So this is all about experimentation. When it comes to rolling the clay, we're going to use the rolling pin, and if you try to get wooden batons, this will help to make sure you've got a consistent slab of clay. So now to cut the clay, please don't use your fingers, use the wire cutters, and this stops air bubbles then from appearing from your finger marks in the clay. So what I'm going to do now is just to cut a slice of clay, and we'll begin by using this. No air inside, it's perfect, so it doesn't need to be wedged or kneaded. Make sure you close the bag up well after you remove the clay, or else it will dry out and become very difficult to use. So here I have my slab of clay, and we work on wood always. Make sure you have a good solid workspace, because the handiest thing here is to use the palm of your hand to begin flattening the clay. This will also remove any air bubbles.
Next we will roll the clay, making sure to use the batons to keep the clay thickness consistent. We will roll away from the body. This is easier to do standing. Make sure to flip the clay and to roll it from every angle.
Clay is usually 3/4 of an inch thick. This is a good consistency to work with. Any thicker and it'll be too thick and could explode in the kiln, and any thinner it'll be too fragile and it will break. So 3/4 of an inch is perfect for this stoneware clay. Next, we're going to use the rubber kidney to smooth the clay. This also condenses the clay and makes it stronger, as well as smoothing it. So even if I wanted a rough texture, I would use the kidney first for the extra strength that it gives the clay when it condenses it, moves the molecules together, and again helps to move any air bubbles. So again, we work this from all angles. So here is a nice piece. Again, don't press too hard on the tile or it'll stick to the clay. So I'm just using it to cut around. So here I am using my craft knife. Don't use a kitchen knife.
And be careful not to undercut.
We want to make 3 or 4 of these so that we can try out different surface textures, and we can try slips and glazes. So we want as many surfaces as we can to experiment and play with. So I'll just check this. Again, no air. I'm always checking for air, as it can be disastrous in the kiln. Once you have your tile cut, you will have to smooth it again. And at times you will even have to cut it back into shape. Now what I'm going to do is to use the wooden batons to again push and press it back into shape. I'm going to just round off the edges. Now what I want to do with this one is to try texture. So I'm going to use this little textured rolling pin just to roll into it. So even pressure. Now to set it onto the mould. So here's the mould. I want to create a little dish. Will I go central to the side? You can actually decide for yourselves what you would like. I want to tilt all the edges down. Then neaten the edges. So you can use some of the plastic modelling tools for this, or you can just use your fingers. So you can spend a little bit of time neatening it and checking that there are no sharp edges. We don't want anybody cutting their fingers on sharp edges when it comes out of the kiln. Now to get it to actually dry into shape, we just leave it over the mould. So again, centre it back on, push it back into place, and we're going to set it aside and leave it till the next class where we can add some coloured slip, or we can choose to leave it, fire it for the first firing, the bisque firing, and then try a glaze. So there's one. Now, the second one. If I wanted, again, more texture, what I could do is I could press things into it, or I can roll things into it. So I could have a leaf, I could have some material. But what I want to do with this one is just to leave it completely smooth, because I want to show you how to marble with coloured slip onto this one later. Again, I could cut it a shape, I could put it into a heart shape, or I could put it into an oval shape, or I could put it into a leaf shape. You can experiment and play with that. So this one I want to leave completely smooth, but I want to put a footring onto it. So I'm going to place it down, see if I've got it fairly centered.
And now just to press it into shape. For the footring, I will roll a coil of clay. I pinch it between my fingers and then roll it on the board to smooth it off evenly.
Actually join my footring, I'm going to use water, and you can use the knife or the wire brush. If you didn't want a footring and you wanted to just perhaps have a stand made up of 3 little spheres, you could do that too, where you could place them so that they could form a stand. But I want to show you the footring because it's quite useful and you might use it again in other projects. So when you're happy that you have your coil the thickness that you want, now don't go too thin. If you go too thin, it won't hold up the plate and it might crack. Don't go too thick or it might explode in the kiln. So I'm kind of going just a little bit thinner than my finger. So here we go. I'm going to place this footring onto my slab plate, my slab dish. So approximately that size will work. I advise cutting this at approximately 45-degree angle so that you know for definite one side is going to fit inside the other. And I have plenty of clay here for smoothing later. So I'm just going to join this now, make sure I have it joined well, really push the clay together, make sure that I've got no air trapped in here. trapped air will just explode inside the kiln. So I'll smooth that, make sure I have a good join. So this is where I want to place it. So I just might mark that in. To mark it in, I don't want to use the knife. I'm going to use the etching tool because the knife might just, again, put air in, and that is what I'm trying to avoid. So now using water or slip, which is a mix of water and clay, we are going to join. So we're scoring where we want the join to be, and we're using the water to make it mucky, to create a slip. This creates the best join. If I was joining something quite large, I would definitely mix some clay into the water to make it really tacky and secure. So I'm going over it again, make sure it's really mucky. And to be extra sure, I'm also going to do the same to this side of the footring. So this is called slipping and scoring and is the main joining technique used in clay, for all types of clay. So when you attach it, if you move it gently back and forth, you can feel it starting to stick. Now to neaten it. For this section, you can use your fingers. At times, if this is quite small, it's difficult to use the fingers, and that's when these tools come in really handy. The plastic in particular works very well for this. So I'm going to try one that's rounded at the end, something like this, and see how that works. Now let me just bring the light. So I would join on the inside and the outside of the ring. Now, so that's joined there. I'll come back and neaten it in a minute. Now it's time to join on the outside too. If it's very well joined, you mightn't even need to do this on the outside. Here I'm just taking a very small little bit of clay and joining it. If the clay is too wet and tacky to neaten now, give it about 10-15 minutes and it should be fine.
So next I'm just going to smooth it off. And voila, we have a foot ring.
For my last example, I want to show you how to use the underglaze. So this goes into the bisque firing, it's underglaze. It has to go on when the clay is leather hard. So leather hard is when it's going to hold its shape, it's not too floppy, not too wet.
I'm now mixing up the underglaze so that it's nice consistency to use, not too runny and not too thick. Make sure it's a good consistency and easy to apply. It may take 2 coats. How it looks now will be how it will fire. The colour will be the exact same. While I'm waiting for that to dry, I'm just going to show you some texture examples. You can roll over lacy material to imprint the pattern or any edges of fabric that you may have. It's also possible just to stamp texture into the clay. Now that my blue underglaze has dried,
try and etch in the image of this leaf. So I'm going to try the thinner side. Oh, that's nice. So I used the thicker side to just etch in the main large shape, and now I'm going to use the thinner side to see if I can put in a thinner line.
The etching tools have a thicker and a thinner side, so you can get different thicknesses of line, or you can also use the scratching tool to get a rougher edge. This is like a mark making exercise, but using clay as your medium instead of drawing and pencil and paper. It is also a good idea to experiment with different tools to try to recreate the quality of line that you might desire.
So now I have experimented with scratching through the underglaze. So this technique is known as sgraffito.
Now it's time to place the dish onto the mould and to shape it. Then I can paint with underglaze the underneath of the dish and the sides also. Again, this might take 2 coats of underglaze to get an even finish. Don't forget the edges. Now I will leave the dishes to dry overnight and come back to try marbling on the 3rd dish that's leather hard tomorrow. Don't forget to put your initials on your work. You can etch this in with the etching tool, or you can use the stamps. Now for the marbling on the leather hard 3rd dish. I'm going to use coloured slip, which is coloured clay, and work over a container which can catch the excess slip. I have mixed the slip into 2 different containers to make sure it is runny enough to run into each other and mix well. I basically just pour them onto the clay and tease them together. I can twist the dish so that the actual coloured slip marbles. This works better if you've got 2 contrasting colours. Once applied, the coloured slip appears quite matte and continues to do even after the first bisque firing. But once you add a transparent glaze in the glaze firing, the colours will appear much richer and the plate will be waterproof and weatherproof, similar to the blue dish above.